Hello and welcome everybody to today's event. We'll get started in a couple of minutes and just allow some people to join. While we wait for people to join, I just want to do a quick sound check. If those people that are already joined could drop a test message using the chat feature, your favorite color, whatever it is, doesn't matter, just to check that you can hear my voice.
Everyone's shy.
Either that or they can't hear us, so I'll just run that check again. If anybody could just confirm that our audio is working by putting a message in chat, that would be greatly appreciated.
I think we've just got to enable the chat functionality. I think it's in the Q&A functionality, but Chris is just going to enable the chat functionality because I'm not sure that's working at the moment. So that's why it's good to do a test, Nick. Okay, I can see people in the Q&A saying they can hear us. So I think we're just going to make the chat. Chat functionality should be working now. Yeah, there we go. Perfect.
Okay, super. Excellent. Well, great. Well, it's 2 minutes past, so let's make a start. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's event, Success Served, Optimizing Hospitality Workforce Operations through HR Technology. My name is Nicholas Holloway. I'm from Effective People. Delighted to be able to open our session today, run by Effective People in conjunction with Lace Partners. So let's take a quick look at the agenda for today. So we'll be hearing perspectives in turn from SSP and then Kerzner International on how they are approaching initiatives with HR technology. We'll use the opportunity also to hear from a systems implementer with regard to considerations when embarking on a program of HR technology change. I'll briefly introduce today's participants. So firstly, your facilitator today, I'm delighted to say, is Simon Puryer. Simon joined Lace Partners in 2023 as an executive director, and with an extensive background in consulting, Simon has delivered significant HR transformational change programs involving payroll for many different industries. Simon has hosted a number of roundtable discussions and is a regular speaker and host of payroll transformation webinars. He has been awarded Rewards 300 since 2016 and one of the top 50 knowledge and professional services leaders in payroll. Next is Rob Garner. Starting his career with Sainsbury's and holding a variety of roles, Rob eventually moved to Dixon's Carphone, the leading multinational consumer electrical and mobile retailer, becoming HR director. Rob joined SSP as the UK and Ireland HR director in 2019 and became involved full-time with the HR transformation program in 2021, leading all of the efforts across the entire SSP business. Next, we have Willem Both, a graduate of the Hotel School of The Hague. Willem has dedicated his career to the hotel industry, with leading organization Starwood before joining luxury hotel group Kerzner International. Willem has led numerous major IT initiatives and currently holds the role of Executive Vice President of Information Technology at Kerzner. And then finally, we have Massilia Sarawi. Massilia, who now runs the workforce management practice at Effective People, is an experienced time and scheduling consultant working in a variety of industries across different technologies, helping organizations implement workforce management solutions. I'm super excited to hear the perspective of this incredible lineup. We certainly welcome questions, and we have some time allocated for those questions at the end of the session. So we would invite you to use the Q&A feature here in Zoom at the bottom of your screen to drop any questions you may have at any point, and we will do our very best to address them at the end of the session. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Simon.
Thanks, Nick, and good afternoon, everyone. So just quickly, I don't know how much people will have heard of Lace Partners, but just to give a little bit of context, we're a consultancy working with lots of different organisations to transform HR, payroll, and people experience. And in doing that, we work with many global organisations, supporting them on their transformational journey. And I personally have sort of seen firsthand the challenges that you experience within the hospitality sector, especially when you're faced with such a disconnected workforce. I think the opportunity is huge, and really you can transform your operation, but it's not an easy task. And the change element in all of this shouldn't be underestimated. So I'm really excited to be joined by Rob and Willem to kind of get their perspective very much from a first-hand, hands-on, and just to hear a bit more about their experiences and how they've used HR tools and automation to support them. So I think we'll start with Rob. Rob, it would probably be good initially just to get a little bit of background to SSP. I'm conscious that probably people haven't heard about SSP. They've probably seen lots of the brands on their travels, but do you just want to give a little bit of a flavour to who SSP are?
Yeah, sure. So firstly, thanks very much, Simon and Nick, for having us this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are. SSP runs catering and hospitality outlets in travel locations around the world. So airports, railway stations, and we operate in 38 different countries, right the way from Brazil, North America, UK, Ireland, Northern, Southern Europe, across into EMEA and Asia Pacific. We operate a lot of local brands, but we also have franchise agreements with people like Starbucks, Burger King, Smith's, Yo Sushi, Pret. So there's a lot of brands that people will have seen and are familiar in UK and US and European high streets, but when you come across those brands in a travel location, it's most likely that they are operated by SSP. For lots of different markets, lots of different brands, lots of different propositions, but we do tailor each proposition in each market very much to the local market. So in totality, there are about 450 different propositions or brands across each of our markets.
Right. Quite significant, and therefore quite a mix of workforces and people that you're obviously operating with.
Yes.
Do you want to then just from a point of view of SSP and kind of making that decision to invest in HR, what sort of take us through that thinking and what almost triggered that starting point of acknowledging that sort of something needed to change?
So, SSP as a business has grown and changed an awful lot over the last 20, 30 years. We floated our IPO in 2014, so we're quite a young company in that sense in our current guise, but it's a business which is quite agile and very nimble given the markets we work in. We do acquire brands, we do acquire space, so we grow both through acquisition, through merger, as well as organically in the markets that we're in, and which is a fantastic business model and works brilliantly for being present in that local market. The part that it comes that's challenge from a people point of view is that means that we've got lots of different shapes and sizes and a diverse workforce right across the world, which manifests itself in the different size of market. We operate in the US with about 10,000 people. We operate in Denmark with 400 people. We operate in Estonia with 28 people, and sort of all points in between. So we've got at least 17 different languages officially within the business that we use. We've got markets that have shared service centres. We've got markets that don't have shared service centres. We have markets that have a HR team. We have markets that don't really have a HR team. And so we got to a point when we tipped up to about 40,000 employees that we needed to build a common platform across each of those markets. And one of the main drivers for that was that because of acquisition and because of the different size and capability that we were operating in, that there were lots of different HRIS across the world, and getting a central view of the makeup of our workforce and introducing common ways of working, common working practices was quite tricky. 5 or 6 years ago, when we had such a disparate application landscape, notwithstanding the obvious challenge that brings along support and application support, and how do you manage those different types of applications across the world when you're working in a number of different time zones. So there were lots of I wouldn't say complications, but there were lots of challenges that we were working with, which we felt if we could get everyone onto the same platform would help us to support those markets. But the other point I would make is that this is like all these things, is a change program which is enabled by technology. We implemented SAP SuccessFactors across those markets, but that was the tech to support the change that we wanted to make as a people function. And the main change that we wanted to make was where we have small markets where we don't have a big team, they can really benefit from the experience that the bigger markets or the centres of expertise have in supporting them in their own local people strategy. And previously it was quite hard to do that, because if you take a small market, not a big team, you probably have somebody that does payroll Monday, L&D Tuesday, recruitment Wednesday. It was quite difficult, and they really have benefited from having access to and support from the bigger markets, the centres of expertise, and also being on one platform, benefited from improvements in ways of working, improvements in process, more efficient process, better measurements, better KPIs, which would have been very difficult to achieve without having one common way of working.
So that case for change then, to acknowledging that you needed to kind of shift, and as you say, with such a kind of diverse workforce, was there general buy-in from the business around that need to change?
Yes, there is. I mean, it's when you're introducing something that requires lots of different markets to work in more or less the same way, you're always going to bump into the common problems I'm sure anyone that's listening to this will have faced into, which is when you tell people it's better if we all work the same way and it's more efficient, everyone will nod at you. But what they all really mean is, as long as it's the way I do it now and everyone else does the same thing that I do, right? So you've got to bear that in mind. I think the trickiest part of this was that you're implementing a process which has got to work in a market that has 10,000 people and 65 people in its HR team, and do the same thing more or less in a market that employs 400 people and has 2 people in their team. So you've got to be sensible. You can't build a one size fits all, because it doesn't fit everywhere. And so our strategy behind this was that we would have a global way of working, we would have global processes, but we would obviously temper those based on local requirements to a point. And then I think that's where you get this challenge, which is where do you draw the line? And the line is different in each market. But what I think generally we came across was that there was a general happiness and acceptance of this. The overall plan was accepted. So from a kind of the PLC board and the GEC level, it was very much accepted that this was a positive thing for us to do, and that it would bear dividends. Then you get into each individual market and you start having those real kind of at the coalface conversations with people. You've obviously got to change your approach a little bit, but in the main, it was very much felt that this was the direction that we wanted to go in.
Yeah. So I guess you touched there on the workforce and the variety of those workforces. How did you go about getting that engagement from those different workforces? And I guess adding to that, have you seen as part of this program kind of a real shift in the way kind of people can interact with one another? Because you've obviously got a very disconnected workforce.
Yeah. Well, it's the hospitality industry, right? So we've got a number of, I guess, headwinds in this. So first of all, we operate in difficult to hire in locations. So travel locations are generally quite difficult to hire into because, your commute to an airport is much more difficult than your commute to a supermarket because it's generally out of town. It's an hour on the bus. You've got to go through security. And then, we're a bit less flexible on shift patterns because of that, because there's no point in someone spending 2 hours to get to work to only work a 3 or 4 hour shift. So you want people in the building and you want them there for a while. So the first kind of headwind is, well, it's hard to hire people. And then secondly, it's a hospitality job. So that's quite hard to hire people into as well. And the turnover rates in hospitality are well documented. So we have about 38,000 deskless workers, and they are really hard to talk to. They're hard to talk to because they work shifts. When you're operating an airport restaurant, it's generally 24/7, and you've got people on nights, on days, early mornings, late nights. So talking to that population is quite tough. What actually weirdly worked in our favour is that during lockdown or during COVID, we had to find a way of being able to talk to those people more easily from a support point of view and from reopening units point of view and from managing people that were on furlough or that were on government schemes where they were on work suspension. So we had got a long way forward in addressing how we spoke to those people during lockdown, and that bore dividends when we came out of that situation. We started to reopen again. But I think what we've tended to see is that things like time to hire have got less. It's a foot race when you're hiring people in the hospitality industry. Most people are applying for 2 or 3 jobs, and basically the more efficient you can make it, the more user-friendly you can make it, the easier it is to talk to people, the faster you can get them in the door, the more chance you have of being successful. So I think probably the biggest advantage that we've seen in the year we've been live in Western markets has been that our time to hire is reduced. And also it's easier to engage with people during the hiring process. I think one of the issues we faced prior to this was because we had so many different ways of onboarding people into SSP that the experience was or could be quite different. If you had a really good manager, then people tended to get a really good onboarding experience. If your manager wasn't quite so good at it, you didn't get such a good experience. But now that's much more of a level playing field. So we find that the number of people that would have dropped out of the process, that's lessened as well. So I think from the deskless worker point of view, the getting in the building is a better experience, but also I think when you're in the building, your life cycle management is much clearer. So we've got things like you start to digitize performance management, you start to digitize learning management. Those things make certainly looking after things like food safety training a whole lot easier because you've got an immediate record of who has and who hasn't done it, and it's really easy to talk to those people that haven't done it. And before that was quite hard to do.
That ongoing interaction and that consistency across the business, I guess, is a real shift.
I think the consistency point is well made. I mean, that's one of the main reasons of doing this in the first instance was that no matter which market you worked in, you would have a consistent experience when you joined SSP and through your employee life cycle with SSP.
Yeah.
So, and look, we've been, we're kind of through 80% of the way through the markets that we're going live in. And I've always said that this is, this is the start. These things never end, do they? And we're making improvements now. We'll find that the more markets we bring on board, the better we get, because people will get feedback, we'll get advice, we'll get change requests, we want to do this different, we like this process, we could do it better. And the more people that get into the tool, the better. Because we get more feedback, we get better at what we do.
Yeah. And were there any sort of outcomes that you've seen that perhaps almost you weren't expecting to see, either good or bad? Anything that's come to light?
I don't know if it was unexpected, but there's been a few happy coincidences, should we say?
Okay.
And I would say the kind of the joining together of group functions. So SSP has a very small group team, which we're headquartered in London. We're on the London Stock Exchange, so our group teams are all based in London. Because we were putting a common platform into different countries, we actually started to bring together the country teams very early in the process, was part of the design phase, and that actually started to grow some really strong relationships between those guys. And what we found is that actually you get to a place where people start to self-solve their own questions or problems. When you're in 38 markets with 40,000 people, it's probably not uncommon that someone has a problem in Singapore that someone in Denver has already fixed.
Yeah.
But actually being able to get those people into a virtual room or to talk to each other was something we'd struggled with before. But now you find that comes a bit more naturally, and that's only just started. That will continue to improve over time. But just being able to create those networks, get people to talk to each other, has been a very happy side effect of what we're doing.
And that's massive, isn't it? Both from a kind of an engagement perspective, but also benefiting the wider business. But as you say,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, a small example is that our American business is mainly restaurants in airports, and there are countries where they have maybe 2 or 3 restaurants as part of their proposition. They've got a mix of retail, self-service, bakery, coffee, bars, restaurants, and maybe they only have 2 or 3 restaurants in their portfolio. But when you can speak to a business whose entire business is restaurants, if you have a question or you've got just want to understand a bit more about how that proposition works and how you can maximize it, then that it opens the door to being able to talk to that person, rather than historically that person would have sat there in the market and thought, I've got scratching their head and thinking, I've got a problem in 2 of my units, what can I do about it? Well, now they know, well, there's a whole market of these over here, let's go and talk to them and see what they do. So not just from a people and process point of view, but from a commercial and proposition and brand point of view, the networks have started to grow and improve across the world.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and I'm conscious that we could talk for ages, Rob. But I know we need to move on to Willem in a minute. But I guess just in a couple of minutes, if you were to sort of think about advice you were giving to people that might be thinking about embarking on something like this, are there any sort of words of wisdom that you would impart?
I wouldn't for a moment suggest that I was the wisest person on this, and there'll be many people on this call, the panel included, that have done this hundreds of times. But in my experience, early engagement is the key. Really, really think about who your stakeholders are, because sometimes your stakeholders may not be who you think they are. So you really think about, who do I want to engage, and really think about what's going on in their world and how what you're doing is going to make a positive impact in their world. So I think really early engagement, much earlier than you think. It really pays dividends in the long run, because you create those relationships, and you'll produce a better result. I think the second thing is that you are not going to get it right first time if you're doing something that's going across so many markets. So be really agile, building contingency for where you get surprised, because you will get surprised.
Yeah.
And just, perfection is the enemy of speed. Now, obviously, we want to do things as right as we possibly can, but I think there's been many occasions during the program where we've thought, let's just think a little bit longer about this to give a better result. But don't beat yourself up if you don't get it right first time, because when you're doing things like this and you're making change across so many markets, there's so many cultures and such a diverse workforce, and those markets are growing commercially at different rates. There's different stresses and strains. You're never going to build all those variables into a plan in the first instance. You're not. So just go in, eyes open, ears open, and just listen.
Yeah,
is all I would say.
I think they're great words of wisdom, Rob, and especially that engagement piece, because I think it is something that people, often underestimate, that engagement, both from an outcome of this, but as you say, also through the process, because it's so important to be able to bring those people on the journey and and engage with them throughout the process, rather than just at the end almost.
I mean, I think I'll go in. I'll leave you on this thought, because I know we want to move on to Willem, but I think, try not to badge these stuff as tech transformations, because tech transformations can scare people. You're changing the way that you're going to work as a business for the betterment of your employee base. That's what you're doing. You're introducing a bit of technology to help you on that journey, but fundamentally the outcome is a better experience for your employee. I think if you start with that rather than we are launching a new application, because if you use the words "we're launching a new application," I've found that quite often that puts people off almost immediately.
Yeah.
So sell the benefits first, talk about the tech second, would be my advice.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Rob. I can't say any more than that, but thanks, Rob. That's really interesting and really, I think fascinating from a business landscape perspective. But Willem, I know you've been waiting patiently there, and I'm keen to kind of get your perspective on things. Again, probably it's useful to get a bit of an overview to Kerzner. I was looking at the website and was feeling very jealous about some of the locations and hotels you've got. So do you want to give a little bit of flavor as to a bit of background to Kerzner, first of all?
Sure. Well, what's the old saying? It's money doesn't make happiness, but it's better to cry in a Rolls Royce than a Volkswagen. So it's a little bit like that. Whenever I go to a hotel and I sit in my suit and I feel like an idiot because everybody else is on the beach, and I take one picture and I send it to my wife, everybody gets jealous. So it is a pretty place to sit. But you know what? The server rooms all look alike, I can tell you that. So a little bit about the company. So I worked before for Starwood, which a lot of people also may not know so well, but that's the Westons, the Sheratons, the Four Points. And when Marriott came in and said, this wasn't the merger, it was time to move on to somewhere else. And so that's how I moved over to Kerzner. And so Kerzner was founded by a South African gentleman called Sol Kerzner, a bit of a maverick in the hospitality industry. He had worked his way up through South America, South Africa, had gone through hotels, casinos. A notable one was the Sun City Resort Complex from the famous days of the apartheid time. He also was actually very close friends with Nelson Mandela and helped him with his inauguration, helped him set up the VIP events. But he worked mostly in South Africa and then expanded to Mauritius in 1975 into what eventually would become the one and only Le Saint-Geran in Mauritius. He also, one of the properties that most people will know, he expanded to Bahamas, where he opened up the Atlantis Bahamas, Paradise Island. Very large, 3,800 room that ended up being, and then open up the Atlantis in Dubai on top of the Palm, where it's close to where I am in Dubai here. And so then after a while, he did sell the company to ICD, the Investment Corporation of Dubai, basically the investment arm of the Dubai government, where we work for now. And so as a company, that we basically have a few main brands and then some smaller ones. So Atlantis, we've talked about it. We only have 3 hotels, but they're $2 billion hotels typically. So you don't have that many. And there's this little Goldilocks zone in the world that you can have them, where you have enough airport traffic close by, the weather is good enough, and you can get the correct rates in that. So we have 3 hotels in the world, 2 in Dubai and 1 in Sanya. And so I'm not mentioning the Bahama ones because that's actually no longer part of the company. And then the one and only, so that's the ultra luxury resorts, small little resorts in amazing and also strange places. So, you know, we're in the middle of the jungles in Rwanda, close to the gorillas. We're on the, you know, the little specks of sand in Maldives, in Baja Peninsula, in Mexico, Maldives, and what is it? In Malaysia and a few other places as well. So beautiful, beautiful little resorts.
I'd say you're making us all very jealous mentioning all these amazing locations.
Nice. Yes, it's nice. It's nice. Again, like I said, it's the inside is from an IT perspective is and maybe we shouldn't have centralized systems, you know, maybe centralized systems are a bad thing. We need to get more
local.
Go
to every location on a regular basis.
I gotta plug them in. Exactly.
So I'm sure a lot of what Rob was saying, you know, resonates from a point of view of the kind of, again, the challenges you've got around, you know, the workforce and, you know, that disconnected workforce. But again, Willem, it would be really great to understand from your perspective whether there was sort of one thing that, you know, triggered this investment, because you've obviously invested very heavily from a kind of an HR platform perspective. Do you just want to sort of give, again, a bit of a flavor, a feel for, you know, what that point was where there was a general acknowledgement that something needed to be done and to change?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as we grew and kind of became a little bit more professional, if you will, we started all, I mean, the name itself says it already, right? One and only, all very individual resorts. It's all focused on guest service and luxury and individualism, and they're in the middle of nowhere. So there's not really a lot of connections with each other. And so as everybody used local systems, local setups, local staff, local language, local everything. But as we grew, our guests were starting to move from property to property. So we needed to have guest databases and CRMs, but also our staff started moving from property to property. And so we needed systems that were able to accommodate that as well. And we also started to do more standardized training programs, and we wanted to make sure that we could do reviews in a standardized way. So we really needed to formalize this a little bit more, and we realized everything was extremely local, and not much different than what Rob had mentioned. Everything was just so local and disconnected that we had no view into what was happening. So it was critical that we started to move this together.
So that standardization was obviously was key. And how have you used technology then to kind of really drive that standardization across the business?
Well, so one thing that it did help us actually, the one moment where actually really it was drove it home for us was when we were talking with our CEO, and we said, so how many employees do we have? And it was a little bit of a quiet moment. And we said,
it's always a good test when a company's always like, I'm not sure.
20,000, but yeah, so now I can tell you we have 17,835. So at least we know that now. So that's definitely good. And so it's really helped us. The technologies has really helped connect all of this together. We've been able to do this standardized training. So, for instance, cybersecurity, obviously one of the most unpleasant things in IT that we always have to talk about, but absolutely critical. So we've been able to deploy these standardized titles, standardized training, standardized reviews. We've been able to finally get these out all over the place. And to the different properties. We've also been able to use, because we use the single sign-on, so again, from a security perspective, but also from an employee or colleague convenience perspective, we've been able to make it really simple for people to connect and see their view. And I completely agree with Rob. You know, you need to really see what's the benefit for people, right? If you're saying, hey, we're going to roll out this global system just so corporate can see your data, you know, it's not that you're not going to be the most successful deployer of systems out there and get a huge amount of buy-in. But we've been able to explain all the different benefits that people are getting out of it. Again, for the ease of the information lookup for themselves as well, that they've been able to do, you know, using integration into our intranet systems as well. So the close integration and making it easy for them, so they no longer have to go into HR or into a kiosk machine to go and see their information.
So that whole kind of work experience for your teams and employees, I guess, has been huge.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really made it much easier. And using the app is extremely simple and convenient. So we are rolling it out throughout the world. We did find in some situations it doesn't make sense to do exactly cookie cutter everywhere. So you do have to adjust it to the local setup.
Yeah.
And so in some cases we did decide that we wanted to have the Employee Central and basically all the modules except for payroll and time and attendance, and have the local payroll and time and attendance deeply integrated and interfaced into Employee Central.
Yeah.
So that we could keep the local language, local setup, and everything else, but still have that global view and get all the other benefits that I talked about.
And it's interesting you touch on the time and attendance, because again, very conscious with the type of organization you are. You're obviously heavily reliant on that time and attendance information. You must have people that are switching shifts and doing extra time and all of that kind of thing. So from a time and attendance perspective specifically, what have you seen from kind of where you were to where you are today? Now you have far more powerful tools in place.
Yeah, it's still a bit of a journey. So in Dubai is where we have our biggest properties. So the Atlantis, the Royal, together with the now they've got the world's largest water park as part of this as well. So it's a massive amount. It's nearly 10,000 people that are part of that complex alone. And like you said, there's anything from salaried employees to full-time employees to part-time employees to contractors to all different types of setups that we have. And so we're very much looking forward to having the workforce and the whole scheduling set up properly so that we can do the forecasting. The demand forecasting is going to be absolutely critical to make sure that you limit overtime and that you do have the right scheduling available, because the water park is also for people who don't stay in our hotels, right? Who come just on a day-to-day visit, or we have all the different restaurants. There's about 40-50 restaurants that are out there that we're doing in this complex. And so we have lots of visitors. And so these demands go up and down a lot. And so to be able to adjust on the fly as much as possible.
Yeah.
Is really important.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that must be massive. So again, I guess thinking from an outcomes perspective, sort of similar question that I sort of said to Rob. I'm sure there were a number of planned outcomes and benefits that you were trying to achieve, but what about those that may be some nice unplanned benefits that you've seen as a result of this?
I think we were able to clean up quite a bit of the things that were happening that you didn't realize were happening, right? Because it's all people could hide a little bit behind their local system, and that's just the way it works.
Yeah.
And so now we've been able to really get this a little bit more properly organized. And so by setting up these standard processes, and as Rob mentioned too, you're no longer depending on a great HR person only, right? Obviously, they're still absolutely critical, but you're no longer depending on that person to do the process right, or to do the right things. And so it's critical that we have these right processes in place. And so we've been able to do quite a bit of cleanup when we roll this out and say, well, hold on, there's a way of doing this better, and this may not be really the ideal way of doing it. And I think the next things that are going to come out of that is really the next thing is going to be part of the interviewing process, right? The interviewing and hiring process. I really think that we'll be able to expand a lot on it. To me, as great as this system is, it's kind of a foundation, right? Now that you have all this data, now that you have this whole system, now we can add on all these different things that automate the workflow. So one of the next things that we're going to be doing is also with our SharePoint integration, where we have centralized management of all our documents and work contracts and CVs, and so that they can easily be shared between the different properties in a secure and convenient way.
And I think, when you mentioned about those single points of failure, often people underestimate how reliant they are on, you know, certain individuals and certain ways of working. So to get that consistency and that, you know, that ability that if you had to suddenly, you know, get somebody to pick up something else, you could do that. That's huge, really, isn't it? It's a massive shift.
Yeah, and Rob nailed it again on the hospitality has a huge turnover, right? And in a place like Dubai, where we are fairly heavily located, there's a huge growth still. So people are being drawn to different properties in different cities, and Saudi is, of course, still a huge draw here. So lots of people moving. So there is quite a bit of turnover in management personnel as well. So yes, it's critical to have that, so somebody can hit the ground running when they come into the property.
Yeah. No, fascinating. And again, the time whizzes by when talking through all this. But I guess same question to you, Willem, from a words of wisdom. If you were to have your time again, or you were to kind of, you know, impart some bits of knowledge to the kind of people listening, what would you say?
Yeah, besides the one that indeed this make sure you know your stakeholders and that you get your involvement right. It's not don't focus on corporate wants a system so that we can better spy on you. That's not really the message you want to get out there. It's really the other part is because besides the benefits, the really important one that I found is don't underestimate the migration of data management, right? So you have all these hotels were running their own local payroll and their own local time and attendance. And if in case where they do switch completely to the employee central payroll as well, there is this migration and the balance that you have to do to keep these two in sync as you're doing your transition. And that has been a lot more effort than I had expected. And it's taken really considerable amount of time and delays, which is okay. I mean, some of these things happen, but it's much longer and much more painful than you would think. So it really takes a lot of focus. And that would be my message to people who are starting this. Focus, make sure that you have focus and that you really get dedicated people on doing this data analysis and data balancing so that you can go live and not say, oh, everybody's been too busy and we didn't have time to fully manage, and now we have 99% correct and therefore we cannot go live.
It's funny, isn't it? Because it's a bit like we were saying with Rob around change, kind of data and change are always those things that kind of people underestimate just how much time and effort really has to go into managing those elements. Thanks, Willem.
Absolutely. And of course they were using local payroll, and as you know, inadequate as it may have been, they were familiar with it, and they used it, and the button was on the left and now the button's on the right, and what do I do now? And so that there's you know, these things you definitely do. Yeah, you don't want to underestimate that part either.
Yeah. No, thanks, Willem. It's really interesting, and as I say, could talk to you both for ages. So thank you for sharing that experience. But Marsilia, I'm conscious you've been patiently waiting in the background, and you're obviously used to working more from a sort of consultancy side, supporting organizations with these kind of challenges and these programs of work they're undergoing. So from your perspective, just sort of hearing what Willem and Rob have gone through, what kind of things really resonate with you from your own experiences?
Yes, so it's been really great hearing these two perspectives, because it's really true, and it speaks to the exact challenges that we see our customer face and how they approach them. So it's just to double down on the reality of the hospitality industry with compliance across multiple regions, across multiple markets, with every labor law that comes in play as well, and coordination across multiple locations. So really, you have a challenge of managing compliance overall, having your eyes on the overtimes, the breaks, the pay rates. That can be a logistical nightmare. So really leveraging the technology that can automate that compliance for you and really allow you then to focus a little bit more to the operation. So yeah, overall, we see a lot of companies into the hospitality industry also growing, as I said, across multiple locations or by acquisition. In that case, really having a centralized tool allow you to deploy your operation and get set up in your new markets way faster, and ensuring as much as possible to standardize the process, because of course it cannot be a one size fits all. One last point that you were mentioning, Willem, as well, is really the need for, as much as possible, as for real-time analytics or forecasting, because it is a fast-paced environment. A lot of decision needs to be made as soon as possible to be able to respond to the demand, and having these data points to then make either better decision making at a global or group level, but also enabling the operation more on the ground in terms of their own planning and decision making has been something I think critical that I've seen come a lot as well. And we try to bring as much as possible focus on that through the transformation that we work with.
Yeah, and I think that compliance point you make is again, people often underestimate that, because I think people are so reliant on individuals having that, that experience and that knowledge, and therefore again it's that sort of single point of failure. So as you say, to being able to automate and have that automatically calculated is a massive shift, and from a legislation perspective, shouldn't again be underestimated. So and what about if you were to think again, Marcella, from a advice, from words of wisdom, from your own experiences, what would you, taking more of a kind of a consultancy lens, what kind of things would you say to people listening today?
Definitely. So when you're thinking of embarking into that transformation journey, I would say think about it both preparedness from a people perspective and then also from a technology perspective. So when we're saying from a people perspective, kind of just to continue on what was mentioned as well, really having your key stakeholders engage as early as possible, but also what I would add is assessing your current HR process. So assess your current processes. What are you doing right now and what are your pain points? So in hospitality, managing shift workers, dealing with high turnover, seasonal staffing can have significant challenges. So when you're implementing a technology, try to focus on addressing your specific needs of your business. It's not a one recipe for success. So at the end of the day, you need to have in mind what are your processes and what problems are you trying to resolve really. And to resurface these problems, you need to have the right people in the room. So engage the right stakeholders as early as possible. So we work with HR and IT on these nice programs, but I always advocate for the operations because they're owning a lot of the processes and the truth and a lot of the value that will be realized at the end of the project. So really support these operational realities and make sure that it's aligning both from with the front and back of the house in terms of reducing any frictions during the deployments. So that is really from a people perspective. And then when you're getting ready for this type of transformation, there is a technological aspect of readiness. So data readiness, making sure, as Willem mentioned, that you have your data ready. You're really dealing with a lot of different types of people, permanent staff, part-timers, seasonal workers. So the data is spread across different locations and different type of systems. So making sure that the data readiness, or at least the process of getting the data ready, is assessed early on. And I think I will give you on the last point in terms of even more specific to the hospitality industry is when you look at your technology landscape, you need to look at a landscape that includes data points that are critical, do not fit necessarily into just the HR view. What I'm saying is that you have multiple systems and data that will lie into your booking platforms, into your point of sales. So all these systems are still critical because for an employee, they don't see as HR systems or operation systems. For them, it's the systems that they're dealing with. So really making sure that you're taking into this account that integration landscape, that your data flows seamlessly, and that will give you then time to focus really on delivering exceptional guest experience rather than switching between multiple systems to get to where you're trying to be.
Yeah. No, I love your point around the processes, because I think, you see it where lots of organizations kind of try and go forward to the to-be process almost, the future world, without, as you say, taking a minute to just sort of step back and look at the current operations and some of those challenges that they're facing to ensure that ultimately it's being fixed. And I think it goes back to Rob's point, which I love as well, around, not treating it as a technology change, actually coming from a kind of people lens, which again, often is so often overlooked. So fascinating. I think, Marcilla, that's been really interesting. And Willem and Rob, thank you. I feel like we could talk for ages. But I'm also conscious that I think we've got some questions that have come in, so we ought to allow enough time to go through those questions. So Nick, shall I hand back to you to go through the questions?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Simon. And once again, thank you, Marcilla, Rob and Willem. Really great input. So we do have some questions. We'll start with this one. Was addressed to you, Rob, but I think it's also relevant as well. It'd be good to get Willem's perspective. It was around mobile technology, and your use of mobile technology for your HR technology, and also the question really around personal mobiles. Is it personal versus corporate? How do you address that?
Well, a very good question. In fact, it was one of the issues that we faced. I mean, the short answer is we offered it as an option rather than as a way of accessing. I think Willem will probably have a point of view around, because you mentioned single sign-on, but one of the challenges we had was around multi-factor authentication for access into single sign-on systems. So we had to come up with a solution which has been different for different countries, because some of the unions in Europe won't allow us to do anything with a personal mobile phone. So there's different solutions, but the overarching strategy was that we offered it as an option, but we didn't force people to download any apps. It was up to them. What we found was about 80% of our workforce downloaded the app, even without telling them to do it, because I'm choosing my words carefully. You can't tell people to do it because you're not paying for their phone, you're not paying for their data. But it's a way of life for a lot of people now to use their phone to do these things. So, and we weren't being duplicitous by assuming that they would just do it anyway. We put tablets in our units, we put shared devices in our units, we put trusted devices in our units, and we gave people a multitude of options to access the applications, one of which was, if you want to download an app on your phone, not in all markets, because you can't there are some markets you just can't do that, but in markets where we could, we said, if you want to use the shared PC, if you want to use the tablet in the unit, if you want to use the trusted device in the unit, use that. If you want to download the app and use it on your mobile phone, do that. Up to you. And we found that 80% of people did that.
Okay, yeah, no, that's really interesting. William, have you got anything to add to that from your perspective?
Yeah. I mean, in similar, we have with so many different apps that we have, we actually push people to say, you must use your corporate phone. You must use your corporate phone. So with this one, we said, hey, guess what? You're actually allowed to use your personal phone if you want to. And everybody got excited. So it did help. We don't have, fortunately, we're not in the jurisdictions where that was causing the problems. But similar to Rob, we also did a deep integration into our intranet. So that even if you didn't want to use your mobile phone for that, and you didn't have a work mobile phone, you could still access it through our intranet through different ways and have the integration there. So very similar. We provide laptops and PCs and kiosks and everything at the different hotels as needed, but also people can use their mobile phones if they want to, or use a PC and just on the browser.
Great, thanks both. Another question here, and Rob, this was directed to you. It's around payroll, and have you ever offered, or are you considering offering, more rapid pay? Pay for convenience for your employees.
I'm not sure what the question is. More rapid pay. So we do offer in some markets the opportunity to pull forward your pay.
Yeah.
I think a lot of hospitality operators do that. I mean, there are rules and regulations around how much you can pull forward, but a lot of people, sadly, particularly this day and age, are working pay packet to pay packet. So we do offer the chance to get your salary earlier, particularly if people have done a lot of overtime and they want to get the money a bit early. We do, but there are limits to it, because the danger is once you've done it once, you get hooked on it, and you're doing it every single month and every single month after that. So we do. The short answer is yes, we do offer that in some markets, but it's got limits around it. But to recognise where people might need the money a bit earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are some markets where it's more common to have weekly or bi-weekly payrolls as well. So yeah, okay. Thank you. Question here, Willem, for you. What are some of the biggest fears around bringing in new technology in a hotel, from both points of view? The frontline employee, the example is, food and beverage, housekeeping, etc., and from an HR perspective.
I mean, from a frontline employee perspective, it's always, oh, here we go again, something else I have to do, right? And I used to be a front office employee, and I do realize, we give you 32 seconds to check somebody in, and you have to mention the name 10 times, and you need to do the opening hours, and you got to get the credit card, and it's got to be secure, and it's got to be quick. And so all these different things just add on to things that make your life difficult, right? And we just come then and say, here's an app, and it's super simple. You just have to press on this. But as was mentioned earlier, you'd need to see it as part of the overall technology landscape, and not just here is a dedicated application. So it's really, how does it fit into everything else that people do? So from an not HR perspective, but from an overall operations perspective, it's critical that you're making life easier, not harder. Don't just add something and add something and add something. Something's got to be taken away. There's got to be a benefit into it. From an HR perspective, I'm not entirely sure what the main fears would be from an HR perspective to use the technology. I think it's mostly benefits. From an IT, I have, half of my face has to be cybersecurity piece. So there's lots of concerns there always to make sure what happens to this data, right? The more we put it in cloud, the more we make it available everywhere. We did an interesting integration with SuccessFactors. For instance, at the moment, somebody new starts, automatically creates their logon into the network and systems, but also the moment that they are leaving, on that date and time that they're leaving, automatically everything gets disconnected. So from that perspective, it makes life a little bit easier.
Yeah, I think that all resonates, and I think one of the biggest fears for any organization in any industry is adoption, right? So you can spend an awful lot of time and effort implementing, but if it's not being used, you're very unlikely to reach the stated business benefits from your investment. And I think maybe a supplemental question, and maybe this applies to both of you guys, because you both talked about locations where you have a smaller employee footprint, and you've also talked about the localization aspect without necessarily being 100% global. How do you make sure that those low employee locations are adequately represented in the program when they probably don't have capacity, for a full-time subject matter expertise in a given HR process, for example? How did you capture their requirements?
Yeah, actually is a very good point, because so I mentioned the Atlantis complex with nearly 10,000 people. On the other end, we have the one and only Nyungwe House. It's 22 rooms in the middle of the jungles. And so obviously totally different staff, different requirements, different staffing. We used to have a hotel in Australia, and there, because of it's probably similar to in Europe, you have very limited amount of people. So whereas in Atlantis, we'll have a dedicated person for everything and can have a dedicated job for everybody. In Australia, we had, one person had 4 different hats. And so it's really to make sure that you have the processes set up in such a way, and therefore the system in such a way that it caters for both, is absolutely critical. So we really had to sit down. We started actually with kind of a more of an Atlantis design. We started with a global office because it was an easier thing just to keep our eyes on it. And then we grew from that into a smaller hotel to a bigger hotel, but then going down to smaller hotels again to say, how do we shrink it down to the proper size to make sure? Because one size definitely does not fit all.
Okay, perfect. And Rob, as much as I'd love your perspective on this, I think time has kind of caught us up. So I will just wrap up and just say, that really concludes today's events. And thank you to everybody that joined, and certainly thank you to all of our panelists, Simon, Willem, Robert, and Massilia. If anybody listening would like to talk further to Effective People or Lace Partners about your HR technology transformation, at whatever stage that is, do feel free to reach out. But thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
Thanks, everyone.